Hello, and welcome to the Game Dev Local podcast. I'm your host, Laura Donohue, and you can refer to me as she, her. And today I'm going to be talking to Jonathan Bieda about making research, not war. Woohoo! And Jonathan was very gracious in providing me with his bio, which I had up, and now I've lost it. So I'm pulling it back up. This is a very well done production here. Right. Jonathan is an interaction design director that specializes in user experience design for digital products. He has 19 plus years of experience designing features, products, campaigns for a variety of industries, including healthcare, news, and entertainment. The majority of his career, around 12 years, has been spent in gaming, where he's led UX design and research initiatives on several top grossing games such as Star Wars, Galaxy of Heroes, and Marvel Strike Force, as well as cross-platform co-op games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splintered Fate, which just launched on Nintendo Switch this month. He's also established a UX design and research pipelines at multiple gaming studios, including Electronic Arts, Scopely, Fox Next Games at 20th Century Fox, and Super Evil Megacorp. Jonathan, what have I done compared to that?
Oh, I feel like that was now hearing somebody read it, I feel like it's too wordy. But I appreciate you getting through all of that. And you do
Right.
the heavy research, so you do much more intensive research work than I do. So we very much
Yeah.
appreciate the intense research of the pure researchers for sure.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was excellent and really cool to see as well. Kind of like the movement between games and, working in other industries and how the two can help each other. Oh, and now I'm distracted because you have a cat and it's black and white and it's very cute.
Yep, that is Jonesy. I did not realize that my door was still open.
That's
Uh,
okay. Jonesy will get a credit in the podcast as well. No, but I mean it's super awesome and definitely want to kind of dive in, especially with like developing kind of like research and design pipelines and you know um, kind of establishing that kind of like work process and kind of studios where you know they have we say like maturity levels, which feels like a bit like almost like, you're not mature and it's all very juvenile. But, like for studios where like formalizing, iterative processes are like kind of new.
yeah, it's tricky, right? Like a lot of my roles have been introducing UX design to studios and companies that have never had it before. It is a brand new role for them. Uh, Oftentimes, research is sometimes a brand new role. Sometimes it's centralized at a bigger part of the company, so the teams are maybe like a little bit removed from it. Usually I'm the first one who brings user experience design and research to like an embedded part of the team. So it's really tricky to kind of navigate that stuff. But like that's stuff that I really like to talk about, when I talk to people about like how you can integrate that stuff into the team and how you can do it in a way that will not cause too much conflict. There's always a concern that like research is going to come in and kind of dictate what is needs to be done, and it might interfere with the creative process. Same thing with user experience design sometimes, where they're afraid. Sometimes I've had teams that are afraid that you're going to say, well, things have to be exactly like this product or this product because they are successful or they are our comp, and I always try to approach it from the standpoint of, every product is unique, every product has unique needs, and we have to figure those out together. And there's an experience that you want to create. The designers have a very specific experience they want the users to have. And my job is to get them there, make sure that they can have that experience, get friction out of the way, and advise on what the consequences are going to be of some of the choices that they make, not to dictate what those choices should be. So that's, that can sometimes help with, that friction between teams.
Yeah, providing that reassurance and, kind of helping people understand, what our role is when it comes to, design or making decisions about, game design and things like that. And, we're not there to be like fun ruiners or to rock the boat or anything like that. We're all in it together trying to, deliver what we think is going to be, fun, meaningful, and engaging gameplay. And this kind of tug of war is reminding me of have you ever watched The Bear by any
No, it's
chance?
on my list. Like it's one of those ones where I am really excited to watch it. It's definitely the type of show I would get into, but I never feel like I'm never in the mood right now where I feel like I can handle the stress level that everybody tells me that show is going to give me, right? Like, and I love serious dramas, like Breaking Bad is my favorite TV show of all time, and that is one where you really absolutely have to be in the mood to like handle the stress. But I don't know. In the last couple of years, I just every time I feel like I want to go sit down and watch The Bear, I'm like, I don't know if I could handle an intense workplace stress drama right now. I don't think I can handle it. But so I'd love to hear like how the comparisons about it because I'm very no worries about the spoilers or anything. But yeah, I'm curious
Well,
how
I'll
it kind of
keep it
relates.
spoiler free for everyone and anyone else who might be listening. But essentially, it is like kind of like introducing like new ideas and like iteration and testing new like work processes, and then like just chaos ensues. Um, so and stress and things catch fire, things figuratively and literally. And that's definitely not when I look at that, I'm like, that's not what we want as people who integrate research. That is the opposite.
No, no, for sure. Like, yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult when you are integrating research maybe into a process or a team that hasn't fully fleshed out yet they want to do. Because I mean, sometimes that's great because it can really give people a direction and kind of align the team around oh, well, your market is here, right? Like you actually have the best opportunity to make an impact with these kinds of players with this type of experience. But sometimes then that can mean a lot of spinning of the wheels of like, well, something I run into a lot is like, well, we have to validate everything through research. Like we have to make
Mm,
sure every single decision that we want to make is backed up by some kinds of research. So that can actually take you the other way, like swing the pendulum a little bit too far the other way, where it's like, well, I don't, especially at the beginning of a project, I feel like you can't validate everything, right? You can just kind of get a North Star for a lot of things where it's like, okay, this genre generally needs gameplay that feels like X, Y, and Z, or these are some of the core features that players associate with this genre. So if you're gonna, they're looking for these features. So if you're gonna deviate from that, you need to know that. But like, sometimes there's a lot of want for research to kind of back up any and all decision making that the team is going to make. And especially early on in a project, it's like there just isn't enough to validate, right? Like you can once you have like a core loop to test, then you can start validating things like, well, do we need more features? Do we need this particular feature, right? But like you can't like give a giant list of features at the beginning when there isn't really a product to evaluate and kind of validate like your whole core feature set, I think sometimes without an experience to actually play test, right? I don't know if you've run into an experience like that before, but yeah, I've definitely run into like teams like that who you have to kind of talk them through the idea that you cannot validate every single decision right off the bat. Yeah, I'm just curious what your
right.
experience is like with
Yeah, no,
yeah.
I mean, same. And especially, and even if you're in the middle of testing and people want to like change things on the fly or say, like, oh, well, that didn't work out. So, like, can we test this now instead? And it's like, well, we still haven't gathered, like, you know, all of the data. Like, let's like kind of stay the course. If we try to test too many things at once, then you kind of lose the thread of what the original objectives were. And then you start to get really messy data where, participants have only seen half of a prototype and then they see a different half of another, and it gets very, very mixed up. I am realizing that we're using a lot of kind of different terms here, UX research, UX design, all these different things. So I'm wondering if you could define for us what is UX design?
Yeah, so I mean, I define user experience design as, designing anything that affects the user's ability to solve a problem or retain information. So that's a lot, right? Like, I mean, user experience design is more of a bunch of different components that kind of make up like the holistic user experience. A lot of times it gets distilled down to being more of a product focused discipline where people think about, okay, there is UI, right, which is the traditional visual design element that people interact with. And that's the user experience, right? Whatever it is you are seeing and interacting with buttons, any interactable element. But really it's a wide range of stuff. It can anything that affects the ability to perform tasks or consume information. So that could be anything down to how many unique screens you have, the information on screen, how dense it is, color theory, are the colors making things confusing. Even extends into more creative avenues like narrative. Is the narrative framing does it make sense, and does it wrap around your gameplay in a way that makes sense? And so you're teaching people gameplay sometimes through your narrative, and are you teaching it in a way that is people can retain that information? So I look at my designs under these lenses of I'm usually tasked with storyboarding and wireframing and kind of prototyping the first visual passes at a lot of game design features. And so what I'm trying to do is I do a lot of comp analysis and look at competitors who are doing similar experiences. I take into account our specs and how our experiences want to be, our features want to be, and where they differ and where they're the same. And I try to use the conventions that exist right now and combine them with the intent of the designers. And I try to make passes at screens and flows and I put them under these heuristics while I work on it. And it's usually that these designs have to be learnable. So that means, right, that you can retain information very easily. You can come back and do an action very quickly because you understand where everything is. And efficiency. Efficiency is another one that comes into the learnable bucket. Memorable, and it's satisfying, right? It's fun to do. So that's why I look at games from like a really high meta level and try to go, okay, how many unique screens do we have? Like, is it confusing for people? Like, let's try to show them the same architecture over and over again. Let's make sure our color theory is united across the game, like that the classes of characters have specific colors and that our action buttons, our call to action buttons have a very specific color so people can identify that. They're all in consistent places, so it's very easy to just know, okay, if I hit that, it's going to resolve an action on screen. So it's looking out for a lot of consistency in the experience there. And then I also work a lot with art directors and even creative direction as well on kind of unifying the messaging of the game through the narrative and everything to just make sure that we are communicating out everything that we need to the player. So it's any design that touches communication with the player and affects their ability to kind of engage with the experience. So UI is just kind of one of the areas that and the most prominent like visual area that which is why I think a lot of people just usually lump it into UX. And then another thing we do a lot is we do a lot of testing, right? Like, so research is also a component of UX design for me, where on my side, which is a little separate from like a pure researcher, I do a lot of comp research on my own, but I also do a lot of workshops with the teams to kind of help them get out what it is that, to validate their design decisions essentially on very specific stuff. So I'll do a lot of workshops where they're human computer interaction workshops that I learned when I was still studying about sitting, groups of people down, giving them some kind of a design artifact, like a paper prototype or a representation of a screen, or even like a clickable prototype or something, and doing some activity with that. Usually task-based testing works really well for that, where you can just say to a room full of people or one person one-on-one, like, hey, equip this piece of gear, right? And then you just watch them to see what they do. Or, they tag something on a piece of paper that says, okay, this is where I think I would do that, right? And then you can do things like exercises after that, where you can collate that data by, one of the ways I do that is with an exercise called Rosebud Thorn, where I'll have a room full of people maybe doing an exercise by themselves. Either they're going through a prototype or they're marking paper prototypes. And then at the end, they'll fill out notes on sticky notes that are different colors for problems, ideas they might have, and pain points. And then they'll all together come up and put those up on a representation of the screen, like on a whiteboard or a big drawing of the screen. And then you can start to see collections of areas where problems are amassing and things. And it can help get the game teams kind of out of their own heads and see that, oh, areas that maybe we took for granted or messaging we took for granted that we thought was just going to be easily understood just isn't, right? And it's really valuable to do these workshops with people who are not working on your game. They should be either, they should definitely not be working on your game, but they should also be a broad representation of, your possible players, even players not of that genre, especially if you're working with a casual IP that is going to bring in people who may not have ever tried like a mid-core CCG or RPG before. To really evaluate what is intuitive to them, because what's intuitive to us as people who play these games all the time, we can really lose sight of that, right? I'm always curious to hear like examples of when through workshops and research and stuff like that, where the team has just been so solidly behind this idea that something is intuitive, right? And then they're finally shown through research that like it's not as intuitive to them as they think, because they are so ingrained in like how the game works. I was just curious if you had any examples like that you ran into in your research, because I always find there's always some really interesting
Yeah, for
stories around
me,
that.
what's been a couple things that have been interesting is, I guess, getting a bit meta. I was designing, this was like a survey that I was designing to collect data. And it was looking to understand just people who play games, like in general. And so we were designing the survey on behalf of a client. And we were realizing, anyone could answer this survey, PC gamers, console, mobile gamers, etc. And then I started thinking about the term gamer, and what that actually means to people, and the certain connotations that come with that. So I'm really glad you actually brought up narrative, because the types of terms, words, and phrases that we use can be interpreted in different ways depending on who your audience was. And since I knew the survey was going out to a very general audience, I asked people who I knew, like on our team, that like weren't like people who played video games all day like me, and asked them like, do you play games? And they said no. And I was like, oh, but what about like on your phone? And they were like, yeah, but I wouldn't really like, I don't really consider myself a gamer, or like, I don't really consider it like at the same level as, playing, Call of Duty or whatever. And so like I had to really kind of figure out like, okay, like where like what is the shared language that I should be using to make sure that I'm not blocking out like, a significant portion of the population, what I forget, I don't have the percentages off the top of my head, but there are certainly, I think mobile games are the globally just the most played games. So
Yeah.
it'd be a big mistake to block out all those people. So that was kind of one thing. And then another was, it sounds, at least maybe this is slightly anecdotal, but when I shortened heads up display as HUD, younger people didn't know what that meant. I say younger, I'm like 33. I'm not, I don't know. Anyway, but the kids these days like just didn't know what that was. And I was
I've had that problem. Yep, with HUD.
like mind blown. I thought that was a thing that just like everyone, it's what I grew up with, and we called it a HUD. It's a HUD. So no. So again, I had to, this was something that, and that's like a pretty integral part of, lots of different games. So, I had to like go to the team and say like, I don't know if you can like refer to it as a HUD anymore because like part of the demographic that you're trying to reach out to doesn't know what that is. And instead they call it, I can't remember what they call it anymore.
Yeah, I was
But
curious.
just things like
What
that.
was the term that they were like? Were they like, oh, you mean X? Like, do you remember? Or
I
no?
don't remember. Oh, this is really gonna bother me. But it is, they call it something like, they just call it something, information on the screen. I don't know. Yeah, but it was
Have you ever
something
seen
different.
those videos where they show kids, like like they show them Game Boys from, from the 80s, early 90s, or they show them, iconography like the save
Mm,
icon, which is a floppy disk, right? And ask them, what that is, and they're just like, oh, it's a save icon, right? It's like, well, yeah, but what actually is the icon of? And they're just, I don't know. It just means save, right?
safe.
And that's what's so fascinating about, I don't know, just UX in general to me is how that kind of messaging changes over
Yeah,
time,
it evolves.
generationally, right? It gets learned, it gets ingrained in us, and then there's whole generations that I mean, the story that I always tell about to try to explain to, just to summarize the whole what is UX thing for people. Hopefully, this story maybe really solidifies it. It's this story about, a child going to watch their parent cook meatloaf, and they're watching them cook the meatloaf, and they cut the sides off of the meatloaf before they put it in the pan and then put it in the oven. And the kid's like, "Oh, why do you do that? Why do you cut the sides off of the meatloaf?" And the parent's like, I don't know. That's just how I was taught to cook meatloaf. Maybe your grandparents know, so they go to the grandparents and ask them, hey, why do you cut the sides off the meatloaf before you put it in the oven? And they go, I don't know. That's how I was taught to cook meatloaf. Maybe your great grandparents know. And so they go to the great grandparents and ask them why they do it. And they go, oh, well, that was because the pan was too small. That's the only reason that they cut and there's generations of people who were taught to do it that way because of a decision that was made for a very specific use case, right? And lots of people don't even understand why that decision was made. And so a lot of our work, right, is like trying to get at why is that decision made? Is it the right decision to continue to make, right, in order to get modern audiences, engaged in something or make it easier for people, make a workflow easy to do. We're the one, researchers and UX people are trying to figure that out and figure out if there's a better way to present that
Do
down
we
the
need to cut the meatloaf? Yes or no? We
Yep.
need to know
hmm
why.
We need to know. We must know.
We must. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of being a games researcher and just like a researcher in general is figuring out, like people's motivations and their behaviors for doing things and wanting to do things. And then translating that into, usable data that can be applied to like make decisions. I think that's one of like my absolute favorite parts of being a researcher.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's why I do it. I mean, I do it. Well, I mean, I got into games because games meant so much to me growing up, and they really taught me how to be imaginative and how to also just, it was a way of engaging in worlds where you thought like you were a part of those worlds, in a way that like, obviously I'm a big movie and TV and entertainment person too, but like this just lets you be a part of a fantastical world in a way that no other medium does. And it's such a unique form of storytelling. And it teaches you cognitive problem solving skills in a way that is so fascinating to me. Like the first time I realized that this was like a very serious art form with a lot of design thought that goes into it was like playing the first 3D Zelda I ever played, which was Ocarina of Time. And so, seriously dating myself, and it's also kind of a basic answer because Zelda's always like held, I mean, Zelda's one of my favorite franchises, but it's one of like the world's favorite franchises. So it's nothing super special, but but it's like the idea that those dungeons and the way they're designed and the way they lead you through and teach you how to use a very specific item, and then they give you these incremental puzzles to show you how to use that item and enemies and how to defeat them. And then, you move on to the next dungeon and the next dungeon that's teaching you that. And then eventually they start combining all of that stuff into a singular dungeon where you have to think outside the box of like, well, if I use item A this way and item B in this way, and it's just so, that whole idea is just so fascinating to me, that environmental puzzle design and everything, and how that is a pure UX exercise there, and how to like onboard a person to what you want them to do. How do we introduce the weapon? How do we teach them that this is a thing that you need to shoot in order to activate something? How do we show you on this enemy that this is where their weak spot is? And then how do you do that in a way that doesn't conflict with other information in the game, because you're teaching multiple items at a time, right? You don't want people to be confused when you hit something. You want them to immediately go, oh, I need item A to do this, and I need item B to do this. And that's when it, really hit me that like, wow, so much design thought goes into this and so much creativity. And I was like, I want to do that. Like, that sounds so much fun to be able to design like a dungeon or an experience like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like seeing the delight on players' faces when like they do
Mhm.
figure it out. And and then they find like new and interesting ways to like use certain like tools and items that, when you see the designers that are like, "Oh, wow, we haven't seen that
They
before."
always surprise you,
Yeah.
right? They always surprise you. They'll find something that you didn't think about. And yeah, there's nothing more satisfying than watching somebody enjoy an experience that you crafted for them to enjoy, right? Like it is just, it's the greatest thing. And it really, I mean, it means so much to me to have a Ninja Turtles game on a Nintendo console that just came out, because the early TMNT games were a big part of my growing up on the NES. And um, and they just jumpstart your imagination, right? Like I would like sketch enemies from those, and then I would sketch my own enemies, and I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if those got in there? I would like I would illustrate instruction booklets for fictional games and sequels to
Oh
those
my god,
games and
that's
stuff like that.
amazing. That's so
Yeah, they
cool.
were terrible. If my UX self now, I mean, would go back and evaluate those. Like I tried to like make the instruction booklet, so I was making like the control schemes and everything too. But I didn't understand, right? Like I didn't understand what like UX was, or like, and so I'm like, okay, this special ability is you have to hit B like 12 times or something like that. Do you know what I mean? It's like they would be unplayable experiences. And but so I still have them. I like to look at them every once in a while and just kind of, remind the kid in myself how far we have
Yeah,
come.
yo, and that's
But
like where it starts, right? And making it like so actually I mean, I guess if you start getting into like programming things like that, like well, even the learning curve, like I feel like the learning curve for these kinds of things have like really changed a lot because all you had is a pen and paper. And hey, you were able to make prototypes with that and test out, different game mechanics and loops and things like that. You didn't need to know C# to do that, So it's so great
it's so
that,
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. It's it's just so amazing that people can now, like kids can now go onto like a Roblox and just try to make something, right? Or, there's so many more tools available to them now, and they can, go to YouTube channels and learn about design theory and watch how people are putting games together and see entire tutorials on that. And that's so exciting for that generation. And I just want to be a little part of that, right? I want to make an experience that just like influences somebody the way that I was influenced by it. Because, carrying that spark of imagination through, I think, your
Mm.
life is so, so important. And so, I just want to inspire other people the same way. I want to make the same experiences. And I think a lot of us want that, the people who get into this line of work. We just want to watch people have fun with the experiences that we make.
Absolutely. And this has kind of gotten me thinking also to what we were talking about, like in the very beginning, like defining, UX design and UX research and the intersection between the two, and how, it's looking at like player experiences and the interactions that they have. And talking about how broad that can become. And I don't know if I really have the answer for this. I'm just kind of interested to hear your thoughts. It's like the discipline of UX design can touch so many different things that, other disciplines like specialize in. Like I would think like level design, for example, obviously has a big player experience component there that, you know, that UX designers and level designers are probably collaborating on a lot. Or perhaps, in smaller studios, you might just have a UX designer to like design levels and things like that. But I am wondering, like, how have you? I'm trying to like kind of form this into a question. Should there be these like really super like specific kind of roles? Like, are level designers like markedly different than like a UX designer? Could like, a UX designer, do level design? Like, how does that kind of look?
I do think it's important to have, I mean, obviously it depends on the size of your team and your budget, right? But like, I think it's important to have, if you can, people looking out for very specific parts of the game, and owning that part of the game, right? Like the best teams I've been on is where people feel a really good sense of ownership over their particular part of the game. What I think a UX design, so if you have a level designer, right, and you have a person who is very specifically looking out for that environmental experience and how somebody moves through the level and everything. What a UX designer can do is they can help that person just in terms of giving them feedback on, best practices they see in the space, and also just helping them test and evaluate their levels, right? Like, helping them structure play tests in a way that can get out of the feedback the valuable information. I mean, that's how I've worked with other disciplines in the past where they are very specialized, like, combat. I do that a lot with combat as well, because there's such an art to combat design specifically of thinking about the systems and how, buffs and debuffs stack and even just the feeling of combat in a lot of games. That is a very complicated specialization that somebody should own. But what UX can do is they can help set standards for the project. So a lot of times, like I will try to, it's why I argue for UX to be kind of either a studio wide or a project wide discipline, where they can be at a lead level in the same way that like an art director or um, a game director is, where you can set best practices. You can
Mm.
say, okay, this is how like messaging is done in our game. Like, and so if you're doing combat, you just need to follow these messaging guidelines in terms of like this is how damage is going to be shown, and this is how buffs and debuffs are going to be shown. But you're not dictating the nuances of like what the buffs and debuffs are, when they proc, what the actual abilities are. You're more dictating the high. You're more not dictating, but contributing to the higher level of, well, how does the person find out what has happened? You're
Yeah.
trying, it's the communication of what the system has done is what you're working on with them. And then the other thing you're doing with them is you are helping them test their combat. So, we would have playtests, internal playtests, and I would sit with the designers and go, okay, what is it you need to learn about combat right now, or your level? And we can structure a story that's like, okay, in this playtest, we want you to do these tasks, A, B, C, D, right? And those will show you whether your level design is effective at X, the thing you want to find out, or whether combat is people understand combat the way that you want them to. It's like, okay, attack this enemy, but only use this weapon and tell us how effective it was, or like attack with a couple different characters and then tell us which one you felt was the strongest and was doing well. And so I will help like format that test for them and then like lightly moderate that test while the combat designers or the level designers are watching, and try to basically just be that buffer where it isn't just a level designer or a combat designer watching somebody play cold without some direction of like trying to get out what they want out of it, right? Because a lot of things could interfere. If you're just playing cold, like a lot of things could interfere with like trying to collect the data, as you know. And if we can help structure those tests, then we can really help those specialties get the data that they need to make the revisions that they do. So they should absolutely be in charge of the nuances of those systems. I think UX design can just help them set some best practices at the top level. So we talk, I talk to combat designers, I talk to level designers about like I work with level designers a lot on things like compasses and tracking and like tracking quests and things like that. And it's like, okay, how would you like the experience of moving through the level to be like? Do you want it to be very mysterious, right? Do you want it to be like I don't have any waypoints or anything, and I want to more like come across like things and we would use stuff in the environment to do that? Or are you really worried about people missing something and we can say, okay, when you get near something, we can highlight it, or we could put a tracker on it, or you can track it in the menu and we can have like areas of effect and say, okay, in this area there is stuff to do, and it's just asking them what they want the experience to be, and they're really telling us, right? Like combat and level and those specialties should be telling us what the experiences they want the player to have, and we just advise them on the best practices that we know of to
Mm.
communicate how to get to that experience. So I think structuring the test helps, and just talking to them about best practices like that can help.
Yeah. I mean, I love how, and it's really made me kind of reflect on, well, how would I kind of like define that, and how do I work with these like interdisciplinary teams? And you're absolutely right. It's all about collaboration and setting those best practices and the foundation for like what is the overall goal of the experience? Like, what do we want players to experience and feel while going through our game? And and hopefully it's what we intend it to be. Because something could be created in a certain way and then it's taken a different way by players. And you're absolutely right. It's not us prescribing what the solution is, but highlighting and helping provide clear definitions for why interaction went the way it did. Like you were saying, like what are the implications of not including a game mechanic that's seen across the genre, and what kind of supporting factors can we provide to mitigate that kind of loss or confusion that like players might have, and turn it into some of their own, something unique, something meaningful and engaging and fun, for for the players. And yeah, I think that that really sums it up
Yeah,
really
the
nicely.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, you summed it up really, really well. I think that, the ideal thing is that you have these specialists who are very much looking out for their particular parts of the game. And your job, I think, as a UX person is to um, understand what they want to accomplish and just help them accomplish it. And you're only really going to tell them that things are going to be an issue if it's going to add friction to them having the experience that they want to.
Right.
Um, or you can tell them that, like, well, a lot of games use this or do or present things this way. And it's a totally valid response for the team to say, but we want the player to have this type of experience. And that's fine. And then you test it,
Right.
right? And then you show them, and then the UX person can also really help frame the intent of that test and structure it in a way to make sure they get the data that they want and that outside stuff isn't interfering with getting that data. And then you are showing them, okay, I know you wanted this experience, right? This is where people are having this experience. This is fine. These are where they're getting hung up, right? What would you like? What would you like to change, right, about this experience? And then, or to just validate that yes, what we are doing is getting at that experience, and now we have some best practices in place, and it means that we know better how to like create new levels and like new combat abilities and stuff like that because we know like, oh, the combat messaging is working and everything. It should never really be about like looking at comps and then just kind of throwing designs over the wall and saying like, this is how these games do it and this is right. And there's something that I talk about all the time with teams is like, there's always this idea that like we used to call it the prom queen, right? Where like a game would come out while you were working on your game, and it's the new prom queen because it's a successful game in your genre, and everybody looks at it and goes, "Oh, they have it all figured out, right? Like every decision they must have made in that game was researched and analyzed to death and refined and tested and everything they made there must be really solid concrete reasoning about." And I always say to people on the team of like, you work in game development, that's not true. Like how chaotic it can be and how sometimes things are put in just because you just didn't have enough time, and that's why this messaging didn't get in the way it did, or there were bugs that you just couldn't fix, or there were tech limitations where we just couldn't connect this part of the game to this game. And so we always have to be really critical of like why were these decisions made, and that's where I think the UX designer and researcher can really help their teams. Like, there was this idea 10 or so years ago that the reason that like there weren't like reverse lookup flows and things. So just as a quick definition, like what I mean by a reverse lookup flow is if you are going, let's say you're in an RPG and you're going to a character, this was on mobile. I'm talking about mobile specifically, and you're going to a character and you want to upgrade that character. A lot of the earlier games in that genre that were taking a lot of influence from more like Eastern RPGs, there would be kind of a hard stop there where you'd go to the character and you just see some stats on them and like, oh, they need this currency to upgrade. And you kind of had to back out of that and go looking across the game, like where that currency could be found, right? Or you had to go to the forums and like ask people about it and or join a guild and they would tell you. And at the time, because those games were successful and making a certain amount of money, like, I actually had people saying to me that like, well, there must be a reason that they do that, right? It's probably to promote like social engagement. It means that people have to go to the forums and talk to each other about the game, or it means they have to join a guild, right? And it's like, okay, that could be, right? But it also could be that we just haven't we haven't tried anything where we could like give them an easier path maybe. So if you think about it in terms of player intent, right, you come into an experience and this is when I was working on the Star Wars game because I was really worried at the time that like if you put an IP like Star Wars onto an experience that has a lot of heavy friction where it's like a really data heavy experience where you're collecting these characters that have a lot of upgrade parameters to them. And if you get overwhelmed by that as a casual person, you could bounce off of that experience really quickly, and more casual people are going to come in because of Star Wars. So I was thinking a lot about like, okay, if I'm just a Star Wars fan and I'm coming in, what is the thing I'm trying to pursue? It's like I'm just trying to pursue a character I like, right? Like I just want Darth Vader, for example. So I go straight to Darth Vader, and if I don't have a path from there to go and finish my action, then that's a churn point, right? That's a place I could just bounce off the experience. So if you create flows that, you go to, for example, you go to Darth Vader, you see that he needs a certain resource, you have a find button, and it goes, okay, here's all the places in the game you can get that resource. And not only just showing you a list, which some games were doing, but stopping the experience there, but actually giving them buttons and paths to go to that experience, right? It's like, okay, you could get this in the store, or you could get it in an event, or you could get it in this arena battle, and you can go straight there and you finished the flow. You actually got them to the activity that you wanted them to do. It just wasn't through the conventional path that you thought you were going to get them through. And so a lot of my design in my early gaming days was just about catching those paths. Like, where are people trying to get to activities from? Like, what's motivating them? And watching people play and just trying to add flows to the proper activities in the game as we watched people like go and search for information. And around that same time, a lot of people were doing the same thing. Like, I don't want to like say I didn't invent this idea. It's just that there was a lot of us who were starting to challenge that idea of like why this stuff was done. And that's the most value I think a UX can add to a team. It's just to have that conversation with people and facilitate like how, exercises to get those opportunities out of a team, and get them thinking about the why of why things were designed that way, and not just like resting on the laurels of, well, this game came out, it's successful, it made money, so we have to follow all of the design patterns there, because there's always variables, right? The IP, the time that it's coming out, the platform, there's so many variables that we have to look out for.
Yeah, and challenging those assumptions. I mean, I think, there's a fine line between, we don't want to make designers and developers like necessarily like second guess themselves, because you're right. At the end of the day, every little interaction is not researched. And should there be more? Should there be less? Like, it all like it depends. That's always like my favorite. But my favorite answer to give and the worst answer to give is it depends.
But it's
And
true. It's really situational. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And it's just all about figuring. I'm like gonna use that Meatloaf reference all of the time. By the way, that's just like, all right, just because they cut the meatloaf doesn't mean. And then what if you cut it differently? And what if we bake it in a star pan, and then it looks really cool, and that appeals to like the kids because they think meatloaf is yucky, but now it looks like a star, and yay, everyone wants to eat meatloaf now.
Now all of a sudden they want to eat the meatloaf because it looks cool. Yeah,
exactly.
That's UX right there. And I'm sure there's so many people who are sick of hearing me tell the meatloaf story, because that's like my crutch.
This is the first time for me, and we're going to talk about it at least 5 more times about meatloaf. And I think this actually kind of goes really nicely into my next question, which would be like, what would you say are the biggest challenges that UX designers and researchers are currently facing? And again, just to, beat everyone over the head with a meatloaf, is if you go to great grandma and grandpa and you tell them like, I want to put the meatloaf in a star mold to get, the kids to eat meatloaf, are they going to feel like I don't trust them anymore because, we've done some research and saw that the kids like to eat dino nuggets, so they're probably going to like the star meatloaf. Let's try it out, and kind of like bringing that into, I guess, the non-meatloaf world, which is, like, we, have tried this new thing. Players were a bit confused by it, because these were their expectations. However, like there's, different paths that we can take here. And I think like that kind of, like seesawing between like, you know, you guys are the experts and no one's trying to take that away from you, but also like this is, a collaborative, exercise, and we're trying to make something that is, going to be, enjoyed by the people that you're intending it to be enjoyed by.
Yeah, it's a really tough line to walk, right? Because we're we're trying to apply some scientific methods, right, to a very creative medium, and there can be a lot of resistance or fear that it's going to stifle creativity in some way. And um, I do think, though, that most people that I've worked with are very open to finding, like they want to players to play their game, right? They want them to experience the experience they are designing. So the biggest unifier is watching it happen in real time, watching a player experience something and seeing, oh, they are not experiencing this the way that I had intended, or they're not having the fun I wanted them to have, or they're not doing the activity I wanted them to do. Um, and that can be both, even external players or even internal. So, I guess a quick, not a quick example because I'm long-winded, but the an example of
They're all so great
this.
examples, so please sail
Thanks.
on the winds of Meatloaf.
Wow, that's great. That'll be my autobiography title, Sailing on the Winds
Oh
of
no,
Meatloaf.
there are
Um,
some no weird visuals in my brain, but yeah, yes, to continue.
um, so, maybe, like an example of this maybe is, the workshops can be so valuable. So, just being able to show a design team um, that interpretations of their designs are going to vary depending on the player type, their learned knowledge, and even just things as simple as the IP. Like I used to joke with a game designer I worked with on Star Wars that we would, after working on Star Wars for a couple of years, I loved working on Star Wars. I felt very privileged to work on Star Wars. But it comes with challenges. It comes with
Of course.
baked in learned conventions that people have about the IP and the characters. And we used to joke that we would be excited to create an IP at some point where we could just call a character Hurdy McDamage or Healy McFeelgood, and you would know exactly what it is they are supposed to do in battle, right? And you don't have to worry about it. That came from a struggle we had where when we were making Galaxy of Heroes, where at the time a lot of the comps were using very elemental Rochambeau class wheels to identify what characters were good against another. And so they would, you would get bonuses if you were going up against a water person over a fire person, very traditional elemental stuff. And that works really well in certain fantasy IPs and everything. And because it's a convention that even more casual people can kind of pick up on. That's why the elemental system, I think, is used so often. Some games would try to do, unique things with their class wheels where they would have unique named classes and everything, but they would use identifiers that like evoked the elemental wheel, where it's like, oh, this character is actually like cunning or something, but it's red, so it's essentially fire, right? And water, and wise was blue, and that is essentially, so you saw a lot of variations of that at the time. So of course, that was the thing that we wanted to try first in messaging, like what characters you should put together in a party and who you should attack and things like that. And so we did a lot of testing on different class wheels with different iconography and different colors and assigning them to various Star Wars characters. And I put together workshops for the team to watch, other people in the studio go through, and also external players, that would, it would be like you would have a sheet of paper where all the icons are on one side, and you'd have some blank things, just like write in what you think this icon means, right? And then you'd have some colors, and you would go, okay, if these were battle matchups, like which color do you think would have an advantage over the other? And you would like draw arrows right to the ones that they were like, okay, blue would have over red and things like that, to just kind of show that like, yes, the elemental stuff, is, the more casual people can pick that up and whatnot. And then we would start getting into specific matchups where we would start putting that symbology and colors onto characters and then asking like, okay, who does what in battle? Who has advantages over who? And that's where things just totally fell apart, in that once you start introducing those symbols and colors onto characters that people already know so well and have such learned conventions about, they were, most people were ignoring those symbols entirely, right? Like they were
Wow.
not making their judgments based off of the colors or the icons. It was just, well, Luke Skywalker is always going to be Boba Fett. Like there's no way he would ever lose to Boba Fett, or like, so and so is more powerful than so and so. They just have such
Mm.
learned ideas about these characters, and we did a lot of tests, a couple of tests on different class wheels, and so we really learned that like this is going to be a problem for our IP. Like, I don't know if we can actually just use this convention that like almost every other RPG game was using
Right.
at the time, right? So, we started looking for comps that were doing other things, and then we eventually tried this more general like tagging system, and it wasn't a Rochambeau anymore. Like they removed that idea that like, oh, if you always put person A against person B, person A was always going to get these bonuses. It was more like, okay, these characters are tagged as Jedi. And Jedi in general have these kinds of abilities, right? Maybe they have the heal, and they have their melee, right? They come up and hit people with lightsabers, and you just kind of know, you get to learn that like that category has that. And then there might be bonuses against something that makes sense in the lore. So like if something is tagged Sith, then maybe the Jedi have something over the Sith. And then we actually tried to play it to the combat designers tried to play that up to the IP instead of just an arbitrary kind of class assignment. And that worked so much better, and I think was such a big deal of getting a lot of casual Star Wars people over the hump of like understanding who to collect, who to put together. Like it made a lot more sense now, where like you could put like a lot of, and then if you put like a lot of people of the same tag together, like if you put a bunch of people together that were tagged rebellion, right? Like that they would give each other a bonus. And so there was just this understanding, like the more I know about the IP, like the more I'm rewarded for like knowing who to put together and stuff. But I wasn't punished really for not putting the right people together. It's not like, oh, they're going to be weak against these guys because I got the wrong class matchup. It's just, oh, they're just not going to get the like rebellion bonus or something like that, right? It was only positive if you put those guys together. That was such a boon for the combat, I think, of the game. But, it comes from a place of, the combat designers weren't wrong to try that, right? Like it was the best practice at the time, and made all the sense in the world to try it. And even at the same time, I was like, yeah, we need to figure out a class wheel, right, that works. Like I didn't think that it wasn't going to work. I thought that the class wheel was going to be fine. We just had to find the right wheel and the right, and we all learned it just wasn't going to work for that IP, and we all had to change our assumptions. But it really required like a workshop, seeing people have struggle with it. And that can tear down so many walls of like uh, people being afraid that you are trying to like prescribe, what needs to be done in the design. It's like it makes it feel more like you're trying to find the right thing together. So I would always advise people to like test what is wanted first, advise, and then but just try to show your teams where the problems might be, instead of just trying to just outright just tell them or try to win that out in like a discussion.
Yeah, and actually this like they were able to get like very, immediate feedback, and it wasn't abstract. It was something that they could see, in the moment. And then it actually led to, instead of, kind of like digging in like our heels is, moving on and saying like, well, actually, like, what's going to be a more rewarding experience for the players that we're catering to. And what a great solution, because people, I mean, no matter how deep you are into the lore of Star Wars, there are one, two, three things that you're going to take with you, as precursors to playing this kind of game. And then to be like rewarded for that. And it's like, oh, I actually didn't have to like work hard for that, or like learn something like new. I was able to be, feel clever and like bring in you know, like knowledge of the lore, the movies, and bring that in. And that must have been like a really rewarding experience. But I am
Yeah,
wondering. Oh yeah,
it
sorry,
was
go.
really cool. Oh, I just wanted to say one more thing, which was just like, and that solution came from the designers, right? Like I didn't dictate that solution as the UX person, right? I tested I tried to come up with the class wheel messaging and worked with them on that and tested it. And then we saw that it wasn't working. And then I, let the game designers find the solution to that problem, right? Like, I mean, not let, it is their job, right? That is what they should do. And then, they were like, oh, what if we try this? And then I would be like, oh, I think that would work, right? It's not that like I was trying to force a solution onto them. I was just trying to show them where the problem would be, expose it, and then not dictate whatever their solution was going to be, because at least now they know what the issue is and they got to form the solution. So I give them all the credit for that solution.
Yeah, it's definitely not, we're not like passing the reins. We're both taking, a rein each and steering together and, trying to figure out what the best solution is going to be. And it's not prescriptive. It's not telling someone how to do their
And I think
job
as
again.
long as
Yeah.
those teams, oh sorry, I think as long as those teams feel like they still have ownership over the final solution, of that, like the execution of how to solve the problem, right? And you are advising on the best practices of how to solve that problem, then I think that can really tear down a lot of the walls of fear between, oh, research is going to like really derail what I want to do in the game.
It's such a great way to actually empower teams and kind of like, dispel that myth that, that what we say goes and we have to follow, every recommendation to the letter, or listen, to exactly like to every single piece of feedback that players give. We're really at the end of the day just like a conduit and a guide, to try to help people, who are making the game, just make the best game that we can.
Yeah, and a lot of the times you'll get players in playtests, right, that it's like you were probably never going to get that person. Like they were either like a person who is maybe resistant to, they just don't like this genre, or they don't, there's lots of reasons why somebody could, run up against that friction. And so we have to have people there who are kind of like critically evaluating that data. Because I've also sat in play tests where like, everybody kind of gets really nervous because they see people having issues, and you need kind of a researcher or a UX person there to go, well, the severity of these issues aren't that big of a deal, right? Like there's a level of normal of just kind of getting over a hump of a new experience, right? Like finding where things are, understanding mechanics and everything. And it's hard. It's hard to watch a work you created get evaluated by somebody and they're not having the experience they want, and so it can be very nerve-wracking. And I think we can also be a calming influence for teams a lot too, where we can um, give context to the problems that are going on, and because at times they could be like, oh my god, we have to redo the entire roster because nobody knows how to find this or filter, and you can give them context of like, it's their first couple of minutes. It's not that it's not a big issue that they don't know how to do this yet, right? It'll be a big issue if they don't know how to do it like in their second session or third session or something like that. And that's why like longitudinal studies and everything like that are really valuable too, instead of just doing the like 1 or 2 hour tests. I also always like try to get teams to do at least one longitudinal study where somebody like plays the game for a week and like you see how far they get and what they know after that week, what they don't know, because we all have to learn. We all have different learning curves, and we all have to, absorb new mechanics. And so another way to tear down that wall is just to be that calming influence for them and give them context and just say, well, generally this isn't that big of an issue if somebody doesn't understand this right their first, second time. Like we just have to see if this is something that, becomes a really big issue. Like if they keep making the same bad decisions over and over again, then it's like, okay, now it's a pattern. But the first couple of times it could just be normal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like providing that context, because it might not be that they don't think, they're not performing like a certain action or using a certain item because it's not fun. Maybe they've just forgotten how to use it because they've only had, 45 minutes to play the game, and there are 5 million other things that are going on, and just helping developers like narrow in, like really zero in on the parts of the game that, you know, or the parts of the playtest where we want to get that feedback, and being like really precise about that actually. And that's why, ahead of, any sort of playtest, you come up with like research objectives, so because there are only so many things that you can test and measure in any given amount of time. And so clearly defining that, also kind of helps prepare people as well to know, like, okay, like this is what we're going into, this is what we're focusing on. Other things might come up, but this is where, we're looking for patterns. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. This has been a really great conversation. Any last words of wisdom to give, especially for in like smaller like indie studios?
Yeah, I mean, and thank you so much for having me on, and it was a great conversation. I love talking about research, especially with you, because we've talked about it a couple times now, and it's very fun to share the stories and hear the perspectives on it. I, you know, I just my big thing has been trying to tell teams that their UX designers and researchers can add way more value than I think a lot of teams understand that they can. And I think as long as UX is especially for smaller studios, if you have a UX person, if you can integrate them into multiple pipelines, right? Like not just tasking them with your UI design. If you can, kind of put them at the same at the same table as the leads of game design, the leads of art, the leads of engineering, the PMs. Like the way I've seen it work the best is when those voices are all kind of looking out for different areas of the game and helping each other. Not when UX is kind of lower on the totem pole and is either just coming in after all of these decisions have been made and kind of evaluating what's been done and then trying to refine it, or sometimes it's even put like under art, which can be really difficult. It means the UX designer is kind of limited in what they can affect. So I would just advise you to really leverage what your UX people can do, because they've been trained to look for a lot more than and provide a lot more value than just looking out for like the surface level UI. For example, like the narrative framing on Galaxy of Heroes, I actually helped shape with our game designer, creative director, and Lucasfilm, because we were having issues with players not understanding why you could put characters together from different timelines, right? And so they had this weird feeling of like, I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing, which just kind of like, at first it's not a big deal, but it kind of contributes over time to just like the massive confusion that you can get onboarding to a new game, which can add to friction. And so we worked a lot together on trying to figure out what a player needed out of like narrative framing to figure out like who they are in the universe, right? Like what's my role here and why are these characters together? And that's what we came up with the Hollow game idea where it's like, oh, you're a guy in a cantina playing or a person in a cantina playing a holographic game, which just has representations of all the heroes in history, right? And so you're really just trying to like win a hall table tournament and like be the best fit. And that's why everybody can be put together. And that really got people over like just stop thinking about that, right? And then they start thinking about the game and like who they want to put together, right? And if you can get them over that, that's part of UX too. It's just, leading people into the experience you want. So they can help you in that way. So I would just say, elevate them a little bit, try to get them into all the conversations at the planning stages for features. Ask them to, do some workshops when they are doing the planning to just kind of lightly vet some of the decisions that are being made. Also get them involved in your play testing. They can really help you structure a play test to get out the very specific needs that the team is looking for. And yeah, include them more. They can help you a lot, especially smaller teams with really limited resources.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I mean, any UX designer or researcher just that I've met has had like endless curiosity and just wanting to learn, and not only hone their craft but also really become immersed in your craft as well, and really truly understand it and take that on board when design, whether if it's wireframing, prototyping, or coming up with the next research project. Having that deep immersion in the team and understanding everyone's priorities and disciplines just helps
Yeah, and just know
everybody.
they are trying. Oh, I'm sorry. They are trying to make the experience you want come through, right? They all their onus is just to make sure the player gets out of it what you want them to get out of it. So they shouldn't be coming in and dictating like, no, we're going to make a match three, right? Instead of, this. It's like you have an experience you're trying to create, and they can just really refine it in a way that ensures that as much friction is being removed as possible. It's being onboarded in the best way possible. We can, like you said, change the shape of the tin to make sure that people eat their meatloaf, right? But we're not telling you to cook steak instead of meatloaf, right? We're just trying to
Yeah, we're
help
just saying
people eat the
shallots
meatloaf.
might help, but if you want to use other
Yeah,
uh
a nice red wine,
yeah, I
just
could do red wine reduction. All
I don't know. Do
other.
you have red wine with meatloaf? I don't understand the wine pairings with food, but
Oh, I was thinking like a reduction.
oh,
Maybe that
okay.
you pour on
Oh,
top just to
yeah.
zhuzh it up a little bit if you wanted to, depending
Hmm.
on the audience. Research.
That's research right there.
There you go. Well, thank you so much again, Jonathan. And that concludes another episode of the Game Dev Local podcast. I've been your host, Laura Donohue. You can find me online at LJ Donohue on LinkedIn. A big thank you again to Jonathan Bieda for being my guest today. Where can people go find out more about you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at John Bieda, JonBieda. I also have a portfolio website. It's my full name, jonathanbieda.com or johnbieda.com. Yeah, if you need some UX help on your projects, yeah, or just want to talk UX, I love chatting about it. Feel free to hit me up.
Amazing. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much.